When our best fur friends leave our world, many of us are left wanting one last scritch, one last hug, one last walk together. One Last Network is a space for pet guardians to honor their pets in their senior years and to cope with the days leading up to and after their passing. Here's your host, Angela Schneider, founder of One Last Network and Big White Dog Photography in Spokane, Washington.
Just always get the pictures. Don't hesitate on them. That's a quote from today's episode, The Art of Holding On, number 24 of our podcast about this continuous crazy journey called pet loss grief. Welcome back to One Last Network. Kayla Seifert is a past client with Jessica Wasik at Bark and Gold Photography in Pittsburgh. Kayla had a beautiful tri-colored beagle named Stanley, whom she adopted from Forever Home Beagle Rescue 8 years ago, when Stanley was about 2 years old. He was 10 when he was diagnosed with end-stage kidney failure, prompting Kayla to schedule a rainbow session for him. She had always wanted to get professional photos done of Stanley, but money, time, and life kept getting in the way. She was finally ready to schedule a portrait session, but the dire diagnosis pushed up her timeline. Stanley had always loved being outside, and their favorite pastime was going for hikes in the woods where Kayla said he'd always come to life. Stanley, Kayla, and Jessica met at a favorite park and, well, Kayla's description of the day will sit in my heart forever. Stanley left our physical world in November, and Kayla continues to wind her way down this new path, the grief journey. She explores with Jess that journey and how long and convoluted it can be. Have a listen.
I had the joy of meeting Stanley, but for anyone who didn't know him, tell me all about him and what he was like as a dog.
Yeah, it was hard to not fall in love with Stanley. I know I'm biased. I know that he was my dog and my baby, but really from everybody that he met, everybody loved Stanley. He was an old soul, so his name was really suiting for him. I adopted him. Actually, when I adopted him, I thought that he was about 2 to 3 years old. Now, through the process of when he was sick and seeing the vet and consulting with people, I actually realized he was much older than I thought. He was about 5 years old when I adopted him and around 13 or 14 when he passed. So he was already middle-aged, I suppose, whenever I adopted him, but he was sweet as could be. He was such the calmest boy. He was a very people-y dog. He loved attention from people. To an extent, though, he was still very beagle-y in that he could be aloof and he wasn't a people pleaser. He loved getting attention from people and would greet people and was very calm. He didn't jump. He didn't even bark. So he was just a very easygoing dog, but also Stanley did what Stanley wanted. So if there was something more interesting to do, he would go do that rather than do what I might be telling him to do, especially if we were greeting somebody in the park or something like that and somebody was excited to meet him. Oftentimes he would give you about 10 seconds and then he was too busy. He needed to go off and sniff all the smells that were out there. So very beagle-y in that way, but it was hard not to fall in love with Stanley. He was just such a good boy.
And I can attest to all of that just in those first few minutes of meeting him. He had that little interest and then just wanted to do Stanley things, which completely fine. When you first reached out, you told me one of the items on your bucket list was to have these professional photos done, but that this diagnosis really moved that timeline forward. Tell me more about that urgency that you felt.
Yeah, so I am now 31. I was 30 when Stanley passed away, and I adopted him about 6 months after I graduated college. So I had Stanley basically all of my adult life. And with that comes, I was a student coming out of college and going through life in my 20s, and I was just figuring everything out. I was just, didn't have a lot of money. So I always wanted to get professional pictures of Stanley, but I didn't have the funds or I didn't have the time or, it was just pushed off, whatever it may be. It was just one of those things I hadn't gotten around to yet. going into 2022, it was one of my goals for the year. I knew that this was the year that I was going to get professional pictures of Stanley. I had always dreamed of doing those in the fall because, of course, fall is a very picturesque time, and he's a beagle and he looks very nice with the fall colors. So I thought that that would be good timing. However, our timeline was pushed up a bit. And as you said, there was urgency because he was, towards the end of 2021, he was diagnosed with kidney disease, kidney failure. And I didn't quite realize how serious of a diagnosis that was at the time and what exactly that meant for his timeline of life, unfortunately. So it came to the point where it was August and I'd been working with my vet and getting regular rounds of blood work. And it got to the point where, surprisingly and unfortunately, we found out that he went pretty quickly from stage 2 kidney disease to stage 4, which is the life end of stages of kidney disease. So we had a prognosis of 3 months before he passed away, which was a pretty big shock for me and pretty upsetting. Pretty immediately reached out to people on Facebook and people I knew asking if they knew of a pet photographer, because of course I only had 3 months now. And even so, I didn't want to wait 3 months, of course, because I didn't want to wait until he was very, very sick. I wanted to do them while he was still happy and fairly healthy, which at that time he was. We know we were having some struggles with him eating and things like that, but he still loved his walks, loved being outside, still was in a very good mood and positive spirits. So, I was really, really shockingly surprised and happy at how easy it was to get the rainbow session with you. I had never heard of such a thing before. Looking at your website, I just was looking for a pet photographer, didn't realize that there were such thing as end of life special photography sessions where you could get them, you could get placed rather fast in a time slot. I think we were able to get ours done within like a week and a half from when I signed up. So that was really such a relief, except that you will know that there was a moment there where I didn't think we were going to even make it to that week and a half, which was pretty scary. So we went from getting a 3-month diagnosis for Stanley that he would pass away from his kidney disease to it was 3 days after that, and he just was falling really ill. He wasn't eating at all. He was super lethargic, and he's already a lethargic dog to begin with. But he was sleeping the entire day, could hardly stay conscious, and wasn't interested in going outside, nothing. I didn't know what to think. It just seemed like that was it. And I emailed you and warned you, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to make it. And I was honestly, I was so upset because I knew he was going to pass away, and I accepted that as much as he could. But anybody who was around me knew that the one thing I was like, I just want him to make it to these pictures. Like, it was so important to me because I had not gotten professional pictures of him before. So I was really worried and really upset. But as it turned out, he ended up pulling through that and perking back up. It actually ended up that he had a really bad side effect to the anti-nausea medication that he was given to try to help with his symptoms of kidney disease. So once he, wasn't getting that medication anymore, he perked right back up. And then a few days later, by the time we got back to his pictures, he was fine. He was having a good day. He had all of his energy back again. So it was a roller coaster of emotions, a lot of ups and downs, but I'm just so glad that all worked out. You were so flexible. And I mean, we were able to get our pictures done so fast, which was such a relief. And it wasn't fall. It wasn't what I pictured in my head, but it was August, I believe, or September, something like that. And we got some really beautiful pictures. It was a beautiful day with the wildflowers in the background. So I'm very happy with what we were able to get.
I remember all of that and just hoping that he would be able to feel well enough and still be here to do this. And also that location played an important part in this session with not only his declining health, but what you said was his lack of enthusiasm for his car rides and needing to stay closer to home. Wanting a place he was familiar with, we went to Boyce Park. What did that location mean to the two of you?
Yeah, so initially it actually was a little bit difficult for me to choose a location because, I had Stanley for 8 years. I was lucky enough that I had him that long. Of course, I wish that it was longer, but I had him for 8 years, and him and I moved 6 times in those 8 years, all around the Pittsburgh region. But with that and our love of hiking and checking out new places, there was never one very consistent place that we always went to. We were always exploring new places. We lived in different places around the city, so we were going to different local parks. But at the end of the day, Boyce Park was one that we did go to a lot. And it was, as you said, Stanley was never a big fan of car rides, but especially with him being sick and being nauseous, I didn't want to take him on a super long car ride. I didn't want it to be something that was stressful for him or that he wouldn't be in a good mood for. So I wanted something that was close by. So being that Boyce Park was close to us, and we do have a lot of history at Boyce Park and a lot of good times there, it seemed like the proper place. And of course, you were amenable to coming out that way because it's not exactly on your side of the city. So it was a bit of a hike for you, but I just feel like it worked out so well. When we first got there, it was drizzling rain. So I think there was a moment that we were like, uh-oh, is the weather going to work out for us? But it stopped once we got there. And as I said, it ended up being a beautiful day. There were wildflowers in the backgrounds. You were able to get pictures with the trees behind him, which was so fitting because our main hobby together was going hiking in the woods. And it's where he came alive, was when he was out in the woods and out in nature. So it just looks like where he belongs. And you also got some action shots of him sniffing around and doing his thing, which was really nice. And it just looks like his location where he would always be doing his thing.
To look back on these images and have them feel much more personal to you, I think that adds to the whole experience as well. Yeah. One of the images I remember you specifically asking about was a silhouette of the two of you. And that became one of my very favorites that we created. Watching you two interact so naturally and intimately with tenderness and love, it's exactly what I hope to bring to these sessions. Tell me more about why a silhouette. And now looking back, what does that specific portrait mean to you?
Yeah, I think that once you see what a silhouette picture is, it's hard to argue why you wouldn't want to try to get a silhouette picture. So I saw them on your website. I didn't exactly know how you did those or what it entailed, what kind of location that you needed to, but it just felt like it felt like it could be a very emotional, heartfelt picture of just, your image kind of in the shadow, just the silhouette of you and your dog with the beautiful background behind you, whether it be on a hillside or what it is. So I was drawn to that, and you did a good job. I mean, I know you didn't know this location when you went to it, so it's not as if you knew what you were getting into or what spot would be best to take whatever photo. But I think that you got there before me and kind of scouted out where a good spot for that would be. So that was really great of you to do. But we found a great spot that was on a hillside, and it was just like Stanley and I doing our thing that we would do at home, where I'm just crouched sitting in front of him and holding his face and scrunching up his face and giving him kisses. So it was a very natural moment. It was as if you just caught a very natural moment for us. And yet it's this beautiful photo of just our silhouetted images and this beautiful sky behind us that is just, it's beautiful. Just the blues and the purples and the green grass, the colors of it are magnificent. And it's especially meaningful for me now because what I ended up getting from you for my pictures was one of the memento boxes where you have a picture on the top of the box and you open it and the rest of your images are inside, because I wasn't sure if I'd be ready to have framed photos of him right after he passed. So I thought something like that where you can kind of keep keepsakes in it and look back at it, but it's not, right in front of you everywhere you walk in the house. I thought that would be best. But the silhouette image is the one that I chose as the top cover photo for this box. So anytime I look at it and open it, it's right there. It's the first thing you see. And it's just so fitting. And it's one of those images that I will always have. And I will definitely frame in my house one day whenever I am ready. But it's a priceless photo. I love it so much.
And I think that's a reason why those folio boxes are so appealing, because we're not often ready to have a big photo on the wall of our pet that maybe at that time wasn't looking or feeling as you want to remember them. But to have something that's a little more intimate and a little more private feels more appropriate.
Yes, absolutely.
Are you displaying those anywhere now? Where is your folio box?
So right now, I know I had explained to you a little bit ago, we live in a very small space right now. So I don't have a lot of space where I'm able to display a lot of his mementos, though I have a lot of them. I do have them on a shelf right now next to his urn with his ashes. So that is where they're residing right now, which is, it's out there in the open that I can see them all the time. But it's not a big picture that is hitting me in the face, and I don't have to worry about getting emotional quite yet that way. But certainly I have big plans. We are looking to buy a house that would be much bigger space in the future. And I definitely foresee me having a special place with all of his mementos, because I have the photos, I have his urn, and I have so many other things too. I still have his collar with his tags on those that I will always keep. And I have so many gifts that people have given me. I have pictures of his face painted on him, and so many things that they need to have a special spot all in one place. So that's definitely going to be in the works. And I think that it'll be a little bit easier for me once I'm not in more of the immediate stages of grieving to be able to do that, because it is still an emotional time for me. But it's a process that I'll be moving forward with, is having more and more of his face everywhere around me, for sure, because I could never get enough of that face.
I can understand why. You looked at him and he just like melted your heart and just like climbed in your soul and sat there. His session to me still to this day is so special, because I know how much it meant to you as well. And to be able to have that, I can't even describe it. Having just lost him this past November, you've mentioned that you're definitely still grieving and that it's been what you've called a long and convoluted process. What does that look like for you at this point in your grief journey?
Yeah, it's been a complicated grief journey. I think there was, to start with, so much anticipatory grief. I think that was honestly worse, because he was sick for so long. It was a slow burn. He initially got his diagnosis in November of 2021. And as I had mentioned, I really didn't realize what that entailed. It was a complicated process of finding good treatment for him. And I don't think that the vets quite conveyed to me what that meant and what the timeline for that is. I didn't even know that it was a death prognosis, which kidney disease, it pretty much is, that you can't cure it. So it was many, many months of trying to do everything that I could, knowing that at the end of the day, it was inevitable. So those last 3 months especially were very hard, because I knew exactly around when he was going to pass away, which he did. He passed away 1 week before the 3-month mark. So it was pretty much right on the nose. And those 3 months were hard, not only, knowing that I was going to lose him, but also just the high maintenance of taking care of him. So I was taking him to the vet 3 times a week at that point, trying to do everything I could every day to get him to eat enough, because that was a struggle. So I was going through the drive-through multiple times a week to get him anything that he would eat. And then also just life. Unfortunately, we were moving into a new space in that time span. So it was a lot of stressful things, and knowing that I was going to be losing this very, very important creature in my life was just, I couldn't truly believe it until it actually happened. And once it happens, it was devastating. He's my first dog. He was my little furry soulmate. I'm still processing through it. I was fortunate in that I haven't had to deal with grief truly in a long time, but that meant that I was really inexperienced with it. So I've been learning a lot, and, I know that it is a dog, but I think everybody listening to this will understand how big of a loss this is. And truly, I don't think that there are many more losses in my life that would be much worse than this one. Not that of course, there's very important people in my life that would be just as devastating, but this one was right up there. my baby, who has been with me through so much. So it's been a lot of learning. I've had a lot of supportive people. This podcast seemed to be starting up just as I was going through that process of losing him. So this has been a really good resource for me to go to. And then also there was the complication too, Jess, that I mentioned to you that, Stanley passed away, and it was terrible, but a little bit of a relief too, of course, in that, finally at least it was done. I didn't want it to be done, but that stress of knowing he was going to go and all the running around and taking care of him, at least it was done and it was at peace. But we had, in anticipation of Stanley going and not wanting to have an empty house, we adopted 2 kittens that were brothers in September. So just, they keeping us on our toes and wanting to make sure that we didn't have an empty, quiet house, and that we would have a bit of a distraction and still have some little furry creatures in the house. But it was exactly 2 weeks after he passed away that we took one of our kittens to the same vet, and he got diagnosed with a deadly virus. We didn't expect it at all. We knew he was sick. I thought he maybe had worms or something. And he ended up getting another deathly diagnosis. Fortunately, this one was treatable though. Dealing with it all over again, it was a little bit traumatic of here we go again. I have another animal who is losing weight, who is really lethargic, who might be on death's door. And he really was. He was weeks away from dying, a 5-month-old kitten. You don't expect that whenever you adopt baby animals. You adopt baby animals in the hopes that you don't have to deal with another death anytime soon. So it was really devastating to think that I'm going to go through this all over again. And I'm hardly processing what just happened with my other animal. But fortunately, in this case, this one we're still in the process of treatment, but he is doing so much better, and we've been able to cure him almost to the point where he's officially cured. So that's really exciting. And it's really special because now that we have been treating him and he's been getting better, he has so many qualities that Stanley has, that little kitten. I see so much of him. I can't help but think that Stanley is here helping him or enmeshed in his soul somehow. I think there's just some kind of special connection there. They lived with each other. They didn't know each other too well at that point, but it is something special. I feel like Stanley has been helping us and with us in some way in that process. So there's been a brighter light at the end of this dark tunnel, and I'm really grateful for it.
That's really cool to hear you say that. I've heard a lot that having other pets in the house can sometimes ease that loss of routine and that emptiness and the silence that comes after losing somebody that you've had in your home, and hearing the toenails. And like we just discussed before we jumped on, taking them outside even. It's such a part of our day-to-day life that when it's not there, you don't realize how much of a part in your life that played.
Absolutely. And it's a different kind of animal, but even just the distraction, because, kittens, they're getting into trouble. They're a lot more maintenance than Stanley ever was, as far as they're playing and they're so rambunctious and getting into things. They're so much more bad than Stanley ever was. I'll say that. So it's been fun. It's been a good distraction, and it has allowed me to not wallow too much in my grief too much.
What has been the most challenging part of not having Stanley in your world?
Oh, so much. Stanley was with me through so many ups and downs. Your 20s, I think, are always a challenging time for most people. And he got me through so much. He was the one constant who was by my side through absolutely everything. So it was a bit like losing my support system with having him gone. It felt like for the first time that I was on my own. He really was. I mean, he was my baby. I was the one who took care of him, of course, but he was always there for me. So there's definitely been a huge void not having him here, and I'm still processing that and getting used to that. And it's difficult. One thing I've learned is that I don't think that you ever get over a loss like this. I think it gets a little bit easier in time. It has for me. I still have a long way to go. It's been 2.5 months since I lost Stanley. It feels like it's been 2 years. But I think I'm learning and getting better. And we're getting there. I've had to work through some feelings of guilt as well, which I know they're not rational. I know I don't truly have things to feel guilty over, but I think that's just always one of those things that comes up, feeling that there's things that you could have done better, things that you could have caught earlier, all the what ifs. But at the end of the day, I do believe I did everything that I could for him. And I know undoubtedly he had the most amazing life, not just because of me, but, I have parents that were his grandparents that took him multiple times a week too, that he was their grandchild. So Stanley was never by himself bored. He was always with somebody doing something fun. And he really got to have a good life. So I feel really happy for that I got to give that to him.
I know for many people, this thought of booking a rainbow session comes with a hesitation. They think it's going to be incredibly sad, or they don't think they're going to get through it without crying. For anyone considering hiring a pet photographer for this type of session, what would you tell them?
Oh, absolutely, to just do it. I know that right now, and for me, I felt it too. It's a time that feels very overwhelming and very sad. And it can be hard to know how you're going to feel in the future. I completely understand that feeling, and that it feels like it'll be a really sad time going out and taking pictures, knowing that it's a rainbow session, knowing that your pet is going to pass away at some point soon. However, for me, one of the main things that I've done in my grief with Stanley is just going back and looking at all of his pictures that I've ever taken, but certainly those ones as well, having professional pictures to look back on, to be able to display in your house whenever you are ready to do that, is priceless. I would say for me that looking back and moving forward in my life, I will definitely get pictures of my animals when they are younger as well, just to, have them in the prime of their life whenever they're younger. But those pictures of Stanley, they're beautiful. They look like him because we were able to get him in so fast, and he doesn't look too sick. And it really was a happy day. I think all of us were in good moods and having a good time. And certainly Stanley. If there was one thing I learned from Stanley, he was going through a stage in his life where it was the end of his life, and he never knew it. He always lived in the moment. He never knew he was sick until he was truly sick, and it was about at that time. So when we went to that session, it was just another day for him. He was just happy to be at the park. I think he was actually a little bit annoyed because he was like, why do we have to stop here and take these photos? I want to go over here. I have things to do. So it was just a normal day for him where he got to go to the park and have a good time and sniff his sniffs and just be his happy self, just being a dog. So taking his example, taking your dog's example, because I'm sure everybody else's dog would be the same way, is the best thing you can do, is just living in the moment because they're alive right now and just enjoying the day.
As we wrap this interview, any final words that you want to leave our listeners with?
Just always get the pictures. Don't hesitate on them. Certainly, like I said, I wish I would have gotten pictures of Stanley when he was younger, but I'm so happy that I got the ones that I did. And Jess, you've been just so amazing to work with. I'm so grateful that I was able to find you. Everybody that I asked for recommendations on for a pet photographer recommended you. So if you're in the Pittsburgh area, I definitely recommend going to Jess for your pet photography. But otherwise, I'm just so happy to have what I have with the photos, and that I've gotten to know this One Last Network and the podcast as well to help me through my grief journey. I'm just immensely grateful for it all.
That means not only a lot to me, but I know to our podcast team as well. Thank you so much for sharing not only your experience as a past client, but your day-to-day grief moving forward without Stanley. We know it has no timeline and it's messy and it's confusing, but just know how much I appreciate you joining me and opening up about everything you've been going through.
Thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciate you having me.
I don't think you ever get over a loss like this, Kayla said. She's so very right. We don't just get over the profound loss of losing someone so important to us like Stanley. What we can learn to do is merge the grief into our lives and make choices every day about how to honor the lives our Stanleys lived, the lives we shared together. For many, the pain of loss lessens over time, and it can be softened by understanding and celebrating the love and the connection we find with each other. I want to thank Kayla for sharing her story and for saying such kind words about our podcast. We may not change the world today, but every time we help one person like Kayla ease her pain, even just a tiny bit, this is all worth it. And remember, it is okay to love your dog that damn much. Next week, we go on adventure with my friend, Britt Kazjak, a prolific dog blogger who will give us tips and tricks for hiking, camping, and exploring with senior dogs and cats. Yeah, I said cats. She hikes with her cats. Until then, I'm Angela Schneider, owner of Big White Dog Photography in Spokane, Washington, and your host at One Last Network, signing off to go get some Bella snuggles. Listen to One Last Network on whichever podcast platform you prefer. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you have a friend who might be interested in our content, make sure you share us with them. Thanks for listening.